Hello, theme park enthusiasts, and welcome back to Planet Coaster and to Appleford Amusement Park. So in the last episode, I went ahead and I built the interior of a haunted house ride. Here, I'm just adding a little bit of detailing to the ride still. Gonna put in some things like some dead leaves and such to go ahead and make the ground in these areas, especially around the tombstones and stuff, look a little bit like its exterior. As I said, I'm going with the premise that Appleford really wants people to go on this ride, but he's not going to put too much money into it because he doesn't have that extra money. So we're going to do the little things that he would be capable of. As I said in the previous episode also, there was an issue with this hallway. I felt like it was just this long hallway with nothing going on in it. So at first I add in these torches here. I go ahead and set them to a trigger so that way they'll come on as the car is going past them. Later I change these out for the pirate themed skull and crossbone torches, just because again it's got the skull on it there, a little bit haunted house themed I felt like, so I felt like that was a better idea. Wanted to go ahead and give a ride through here to make sure that everything was functioning as I wanted it to be, and particularly that those new torches worked properly. They did, so that was a success. Here I wanted to go ahead and put a noise in for the clock, so I get that set up here. At the end of this episode I will go ahead and do a POV of the ride again, now with the exterior entirely finished, and you'll be able to hear the audio this time on the ride, so you'll be able to really experience the ride as I intended for the guests as well. One issue I do find in this is there are so many triggered noises, sound effects, lines of dialogue and such. It takes a while to find what you're looking for here. I mean, right now the video footage is sped up dramatically, and yet it still takes a while for me to find the noise for the clock here. That being said though, I can't really complain about it too much because of the fact that it is a really nice thing that we have so much detail in the game. It makes it where I don't have to add in as much from outside or use as many pieces in order to do some things as I feel I would need to otherwise. So, with all of that said, really the ride is complete at this point, so I'm going about here and going ahead and sort of creating the walls to the heights that I want them, now much more in mind with building a building versus the ride. So the building's exterior is now not being dictated by what's necessary for the ride as much as it is sort of how I want it to visually look. So I don't want a ton of different height levels and stuff to it. I want it sort of somewhat uniform. And with that in mind, I go ahead and start placing this down. This wall was one out from where I wanted it, but instead of really changing the entire wall, which I thought might affect the ride, I go ahead and just make it work. Here, I knew I wanted to put these little roof caps onto these sections here. I changed the colors of them, and later on you'll see that I actually edit the colors again because I'm just not happy with this coloration for the roof. Originally I thought I wanted more black and less purple to it, but it just ends up being a very, very dark building overall. So in the end I go back to sort of the standard colors of the roof, and I think it actually works out better for the building overall. There's some color to it, but overall it's still a very black building. Realize here that, you know what, the spires aren't as high as I would like them to be, so I give them a little bit more elevation here, and I go ahead and build up the little turrets that I had going on. Then I struggle to get this one to go back onto the place that it's supposed to be on. Fights me for a little while, finally get it on, and hopefully that'll be the last time I have to move it. I go ahead and extend this roof out because I want it to basically cover the area of the ride entrance as well as that drop down, so that there's actually a roof over that area. I'm thinking sort of from a practical standpoint, if it were to rain or anything like that, that area I would definitely want to be covered. So I do sort of plan that out. I do make a mistake in the building of it, and I end up having to go back later to fix that, as well as with the balcony areas here. As you notice, I'm putting in this building portion here, but I haven't considered the fact that I need to actually cover the balcony with a roof yet. So I'm going to set all this up and then end up having to go back in to deal with that. I also was looking at some of the different designs that I could put onto the roof. Didn't really find anything that really I just was overly happy with, so I go with a fairly straightforward roof pattern to it. But I am fairly pleased with how the overall look of the building comes out, so I guess that it does work in the long run. I have to say, I actually do like this roof design with its angles and such. It almost gives another level to the building. You can sort of see now around the turrets that there was a reason why I needed to elevate the turrets as I did, because of the fact that with this angled roof, it would have made it as high as the turrets otherwise, and I did want to have some elevation above that for those little turrets, as I'm calling them. Just struggling to get the pieces in as I want them to be. Really sort of moving this wall around and stuff, trying to get the roof to fit properly, and at this point not realizing the fact that the roof isn't going to be proper there anyways because of the fact that it has to cover the balcony. Here's when I actually started using the original color of the roof, and I realized, you know what, I actually like it better than the colors that I had gone with, so I go ahead and go about changing all of these pieces to be the same color, going back to the originals. As I said, there's a lot of black on the building, so I feel like changing that to be the original colors actually works better. I think it gives it a little bit of variety and just some color to the building where it would have otherwise been just too black overall. Here I'm just sort of making sure that the turrets do connect to the building in general. Still have not realized about the balconies yet. I'm going to get most of the roof done here and then realize my error and have to redo everything that I've been doing in order to get those balconies in. But for now, life is good, going along here, not thinking about it, not noticing, and I got the exterior of the ceiling sort of done. I then realized that these pieces are incorrect and I need to build out this balcony here. So with that in mind, I go ahead and build those out. And then I'm going to need some supports for this. So I'm going to have to put in some beams. First though, I get the roofs to where they need to be. And the irony is I had struggled so much with that one roof to get it to work properly. And then once I extended the balcony out, there was no issue with it at all. It fit right into place where it should have been. Now with this ride, I do keep in mind the fact that the train goes behind it. So even though the majority of the focus is going to be on the front of the building, I do want the back still looking good because of the fact that people on the train will see it from that perspective. here I realized that fence that I had put in is not going to work for the balcony. So I go with the haunted house balcony here that actually just much more solid, and I feel like really adds to the actual look of the building better. Played around with color a little bit for it, but I just felt like in the end the black fit with the building, and I've got the roof that's a different color already. I don't really need more color here. Here I'm just trying to get it so that any added fencing I need here is sort of evenly divided on the two sides so that it looks as intentional as possible and not just like an afterthought of adding on a separate piece of fencing. Once I sort of have that figured out the way I want it, I go ahead and copy the whole thing over to my other balcony and just repeat it there. Then I need some posts to connect the roof to the balcony. I just go for these here. They seem functional, and really it's not as much about styling as it is just about function in this case. I do want to make sure that the supports look accurate, like they would hold up the roof overall and such, but I do want to keep in mind too that I don't want them blocking the sight lines of the people on the haunted house ride too much, because part of the whole thing here is for the ride to come outside, people to be able to see around and such before they go back inside. And then for this one, considering there's an extra story in there, I have to extend it upwards a little bit. Considering there's this big part of wall here, I decided I wanted to add some stained glass in here just to make it look a bit nicer overall. Go with the purple in the background for the stained glass. These are things that I got off of the workshop. I love the fact that the stained glass is lighted, so that way at night it does actually create its own lighting. Works out really nicely. And I figured since the next room you go into on that side is the one with the spider in it, that the spider works really nicely on the stained glass as sort of a subtle hint of what you're about to encounter, even though most guests aren't going to get it before they go in there. Just using those pieces there at the top to make it a little bit more stylized and look like those posts are very intentional to the building. It's then that I realized that I made the same mistake basically here, and I needed to extend this area out just like I had the two balconies in order to have the entrance of the ride covered by the roof. So I go back in here, alter the roof itself in order to get different pieces in, and then go ahead and put the flat roofing in. With all that being done, I realized, you know what, the turrets are still a bit lower than I want them to be, so I go ahead and elevate them slightly. Here I wanted to go ahead and play around with the possibility of putting a little roof over that area, much more for design's sake than actual practicality. I do end up getting it to work, so I leave that there. Then I go ahead and put in a railing here just to sort of cordon off the area so people actually have to go through the entrances. and it also gives me a place to go ahead and connect some larger beams to hold up this portion of the roof, because it is a much more significant distance here, and I needed to make sure that the roof was held up properly. I tried to use those same little pieces that I had in the previous beam area, and they sort of worked, not nearly as well because of just the sheer thickness of the beam, and so it sort of works. It adds a little detail to it like it was intended, but the beams overall are just the squares that they are. They're very beefy beams, and they need to be for that kind of a distance, I would say. So I get those put into place here. Sort of try to divide it semi-evenly, even though the reality was that the entrance and stuff was not even. So I moved the entrance around in order to try to make it much more even. Now with those in place, I can go back to the actual fencing I want to use to sort of block off this area. One thing I've noticed in this particular park is when I'm putting things in what should be a fairly straight line here, it doesn't go in a straight line. Now, I don't know if that means that actually the ride itself is not straight, though I find that a bit odd, because you would think that the entrance of the ride would be straight across. But for some reason, it really does not seem like it is straight, because as you can see here, I'm having to adjust the angle ever so slightly of the fence as I go along in order to make it appear straight all the way across. Here I was wanting to ensure that the colors I was using on my building were the same ones that were used on the other rides. So went over to the roller coaster, checked those out real fast. Spelling out Haunted House, as I said, on any of the main rides in this park, I'm going to go ahead and use these large lighted letters. This ride is going to be different than a majority of them in the park, where most of them are going to be very, very lit up to give that little extra detail to them. This one being a haunted house and sort of this horror building within the park as it is for the story, I didn't want to have a ton of lighting on it, so it is much more toned down than the rest of the park is. But as I said, I still did want it to have something. So it does have the wording there on the front of it to sort of make it match with the rest of the park. Here I'm laying out the roadway for it a bit. I wanted this area to be much more natural. As I said, I'm going to end up putting in sort of a garden area for this section. And I'm going to sort of put smaller paths that walk through the different garden areas and whatnot. And so with that in mind, I really just wanted it to be much more organic, where other areas of the park is going to be much more right angles and such. This area, as I said, very natural and flowing was the thought process I had for it. Wanted to get those in place though, so that way I could go ahead and put the gates in and have them sort of at the connection of the two paths and set up the entrance for the ride accordingly. Definitely struggling here some with just the angles and whatnot, because things, as I said, that should have been fairly straightforward to be straight using the copy and adjust tools were not being as accurate as I would have liked them to be. So I had to play around with them slightly. Then I decided to go ahead and set up the perimeter of the ride, set up a sort of yard around the entire house. Just so I have the space sort of cordoned off for it, and I can then plan for additional rides in the future based on the space that this particular ride's taking up. As I was building it, I knew that the entrance queue for this was going to be an outdoor queue. I had some ideas of doing a little bit of an indoor section and something very creative, but I scrapped those not because I couldn't do it or it wouldn't have worked, but because of the fact that I felt like it wouldn't have fit this particular part. Again, I was wanting something that was going to be very realistic, but at the same time very cost effective. And what I had planned was not going to be cost effective, especially to do for a simple queue. And so with that in mind, I went ahead and went with what I did here, which was something that I think works nicely by having this yard area. And as you will see, sort of the dead grass and stuff that's going to be in here. But at the same time, it wasn't going to cost nearly as much as the other entrance would have. I do plan on using that entrance in a more high dollar theme park that I plan on building in the future here. But for this one, as I said, I just went with something sort of a little bit toned down and more practical for the scale of this park. On this wall again, you sort of see what I was talking about with the angles of things. Now you would think that a stone wall should fairly accurately just go straight along the ground, pretty straightforward in a nice straight line. But I'm continually having to adjust the pieces of wall to either make them go down or up slightly, and it seems like the angle is just wanting to take the entire thing downwards over a long distance, or not in a straight line. I don't know why that is. It's sort of an odd thing that I've found in Planet Coaster now. I have angle snap on, so you would think that it wouldn't be making any dramatic changes in elevation or direction without me having some input on it, but occasionally it does and I have to adjust it slightly. This is one of those tricks that I find very, very useful in the game, and all I'm doing here is I'm using the copy tool or the duplicate tool so that I stay exactly in the center line of the things where I should be. And I am able to just switch between the columns and the wall pieces over and over again. It makes it where I can make this wall fairly quickly. Even in real time when I was doing it, I think the entire wall around the entire building probably took me maybe 15 to 20 minutes. It was not a long process at all because of the fact that the tool really just makes it where everything is nice and lined up for you. It should function even better than it does. As I said, for some reason, I do find that it does go downhill some over a period, but for the most part, it does work as you would want it to. Here, again, I started learning from past mistakes and such in order to go ahead and make it where I copy more than one piece at the same time, so that way it went even faster with that section. As I said, then I go ahead and I use the terrain paint in order to change it from the green grass that everywhere else in the park is going to have into sort of the dead leaves and the sort of dirt areas that I want inside the fence. Basically sort of making it look like everything has died once that fence was built around it. Just nothing can live within this area. Which, as I said, sort of tells a story for the queue line itself and does give the rider a true hint of what's going on in this ride and with the park in general. Now, of course, the rider and such is not going to pay attention to that because they are going to get on the ride still, but I like that it gives this little bit of story to it. Here I was struggling. I was wanting to paint the back area of the ride just using the same pathing as this, but because of how low the dive on the back of the ride goes there, it would not allow me to change it. So instead I end up going ahead and using some more of the floor pieces so that it all matches the same as the rest of the ride, because I did want to sort of have that matching look to it. Here I go ahead and make a decently long queue. Then I go ahead and put in the fast pass area. Come over here to steal the sign. Look through my stuff and realize I had already made it into a an item so that I could just take it for myself. Then realized I need to change the coloring on it, as I did there. At this point, I had already realized I was wanting to change the coloring throughout the park, but I haven't gone through and done it to a lot of the rides. As you can see in the background there, the roller coaster, or the train station even, and the gondola station, both are still in the lighter purple color. I will be changing those, and you'll see that by the end of the video here. But at this point in time, I hadn't gone through and changed all of those yet. Then I used some of the dead trees that are a part of the game to go ahead and add some interest to the area, along with the graves that I put up here in the entrance queue. Again, just to make it a bit interesting while the guests are waiting to get on the ride. I know that this is a ride that will probably attract a lot of people. For some reason, people seem to really like the track rides, especially if they're decently themed and such. So I wanted to ensure with this one that people were going to have something to look at while they're in line. So a nice little graveyard scene there I thought worked well. Here I was wanting some kind of a window for that center area. Originally I had been thinking of the windows that came in the game. I just wasn't happy with them. So later I'll go ahead and create a stained glass that I feel works better for it. Go ahead and put in a couple of the spooky trees to again add more theming to the area. And then I put some lighting inside of the spooky trees, so that way at night it'll also have a nice look for the overall area. Wanted a few smoke effects coming here, particularly out of the open graves, just again to add a little bit of interest to the area. And then I put little smoke effects from the rest of it, but I basically wanted it so that the majority of the smoke seems to be rising from the open graves. Then find some spooky sounds to play in the area. I find this stained glass piece that I like, or this holder for what I use as a holder for stained glass, and then I sort of create my own stained glass image for it, because I didn't like all the crosses that were on it. So I wanted something that would sort of have the shape of that piece without having the crosses highlighted. So I take this circular piece of glass here with the bat symbol on it, and I go ahead and work on that first and foremost. Then I go through the different pieces of stained glass I have, looking for ones that I feel fit or that I like. I like the idea of using these skulls in it, though I do push those a bit further in so they're sort of behind the window area, just to give different dimension and interest to the piece overall. Then I found this piece of stained glass that had sort of the full moon in it. I was really hoping to be able to use that full moon at the top completely, but it was just really hard to get it to fit in properly. So I tried to put it in here originally. I even take the overall structure over to the building, and then I realized that I have pieces of stained glass that are somewhat sticking through the piece. And I didn't want that. I'm wanting something here that's going to look really solid overall. So when I realize that those pieces are sort of hanging out the side there, I don't like it. I don't feel like it's finished off looking. So I take it back off the building, take it over to the grass here so I can work on it more, remove that piece, adjust the other stuff, and then play around with this one some more. Because I want the stained glass to cover the entirety of the area so there's no empty space, but I do want it to sort of be within the bounds of the actual structure. when it doesn't work exactly as I had hoped that it might, I go ahead and find these other pieces that I can put in instead, and I fit them in to sort of fill out the area there. Don't know exactly why the video has become sort of stuttery here as it has. I think it's just the amount of video that I had for this area became a little bit much for my system at that point. So once I had the stained glass in place as I wanted, I go ahead and work on a few roof details here, put in a few chimneys. They aren't functional to anything inside the house, obviously, but I did want them to still have a fairly real tech look to them, and so I put a few smoke machines inside of them as well to just give some colored smoke to the overall thing. I wanted some windows then on the actual turrets, and so those are the first windows that I put in, just to, again, give some lighting to the building, but not an enormous amount. I also put these balconies in place here on the sides of the building, along with some doors, just to make it where we're not dealing with just a large rectangular box or something, but it's got some different curves and such to it. Also, I felt like I wanted to put some characters on the different sides of the building, so that way passers-by or people on the train and such would be able to see these different characters and be drawn to come onto the ride as well. Played around with a couple different windows there and thought, you know what, I'd rather go with a piece of stained glass. So I find another piece of stained glass that I like there, put it in place. Had another idea of maybe what was wrong with these lights, and I try a box to cover them. Looking for the box, there we are. This was from a content creator, Pixelated, who uses boxes basically to block out lights in some of his creations. As I said in the previous video, what I did not consider at the time when I was doing this is that the lighting that is showing here might not be my lighting at all, but actually might be lighting that is just coming from the characters themselves. Hadn't considered that before, and now that I've thought about it, it probably is something that I will look into on this ride, because it might be something I can adjust very easily. Here I'd seen this map and thought, you know what, it's something I want to stick over at that building, so ran over there real fast, did it. Really, that's something that I've been doing during these episodes quite a bit in the background, is I'll just come across something and be like, hey, that'll fit really well over here. So I'll just run over and go put it on into the place that I want it real fast. Here I was looking for some kind of wood detail that I could put around the different doors, but I really didn't find anything that I felt would fit for the haunted house theme and that could be colored, because the majority of these pieces, there was a few that I liked the look of, say this one wasn't that bad, but I couldn't color it then, and really white was not going to work for what I wanted here. I did like that piece that I just noticed though, and I will end up using that piece again, but I'll end up using it on the interior of the house, not on the exterior. Found those skulls, thought about using them, didn't like the way they looked there. I thought it went a little bit too cheap in the way it looked, so I ended up scrapping the idea. But I do remember the skulls in the end, and I do end up using them in a way that you will see here later in the video. So again, here I'm just playing with the different windows that are available. I really wanted them at the height that I get these windows here. So I go ahead and put them in the place I want them. You gotta understand that this building overall is actually multiple buildings that is combined together. So just using the key to put windows at a certain level doesn't really work, because there are multiple levels that it will consider when it's trying to place windows here. I went ahead and turned on some of the windows, so that way some of them just have curtains in them, while other ones have illumination to them. I did this on all 3 levels of the building. You will see here that I realized that certain curtains are actually lights of their own. I believe it's those small square windows I just put in there, but then when it's dark out, you still see those curtains, which is really unfortunate. It's not what I wanted, so I end up having to turn those windows off throughout the process. The ones that I could, I leave the bare curtains on, and then just have a few of the ones lit, so that way it has both looks to it. There you can sort of see that the curtains were lit as I was talking about, but I don't notice it at that point. I will later, and I'll deal with them at a later point. Here I wanted to add a little bit more detail to the roof, so I looked at putting some chimneys in. I originally was thinking about putting that little cover on them, but with these bigger chimneys, I just felt it didn't work. So instead, I put a smoke machine inside of them, put a couple of them onto the roof, with some red smoke into them. Why I went with red, I'm not exactly sure. I just thought it looked good as far as coloring for it. I wanted something that sort of said that there was very unnatural things going on, both from the storytelling view of the ride as well as the actual reality of the ride. So I wanted it to be something where it would seem eerie and convey this feeling that it's not quite right to the rider overall. Then I decided, that fencing did not work for the balconies, but it really does work quite nicely for the roof. So I go ahead around the entirety of the roof and put it into place here. Trying to ensure that all these pieces are lined up well, because I really want to make sure that it's got a nice uniform look to it. I think about using these pieces on the corners, realize that where I've put the fence it won't work, and I don't really want the fence pushed back in any further than it is. I sort of like where it is, so don't want to deal with that. Here I'm not sure exactly what it was that I was trying to check out. I evidently had to step away for a moment. As I said, I really feel like this should have created nice straight lines very easily, but for some reason it did not, so I have to continually go around here and adjust as I'm going along these large expanses to get it to be as straight as possible, because it'll start veering away from the edge, and so you'll see me at points here delete sections. I'm always trying to make sure that from the different angles it looks correct and such. But sometimes it just doesn't. I have to make little adjustments to it, move it over slightly and such. Here I had to make a fairly big adjustment, there you saw. Whereas it doesn't want to line up exactly straight. I'm not sure why that is. I don't know what exactly in the game makes that happen that way, because I mean, this is not like an outside asset that I'm putting in. This is just actually from the game. So you would think it should line up fairly easily on its own. But for some reason it chooses not to. Alright, with that railing in place, I go ahead back in and I'm looking at the different details of what I can put on this wall to add more interest to it. I wanted something, but I didn't want it to be too profound, as I felt like the actual stained glass piece there in the background really sets the tone for that area. Then I come over here, I add in the windows and such to the back of the building, same as I had on the front or on the sides. Excuse me, it is a bit late here and I'm trying to record this audio before heading to sleep, so a little bit on the tired side. But go ahead and put in all these windows here. Then I go ahead and duplicate all the balconies as well, so that way I can get those to be the way I want them. Really using the duplicate tool works best here, I feel, because then you're able to just rotate them the 90 degrees you need and just put them over to the area, and you know that they're staying at the same height and everything that you had originally wanted. So that's what I do here. And then I go ahead and take some of the pieces and I duplicate them over again so that I get this full wall of windows and doors. Then I just have to make sure that they're lined up where I want them, which is what I'm doing now. At that point, I started working on what I was going to put in here as a crypt. This does get scrapped in the end. You'll see what I end up doing instead of it. I think that the final product works out better than this. This was similar to what I did with my roller coaster and stuff. Basically a little building here that was going to have a shop and a bathroom and ATM, those kind of things in it. But I just felt like in the end it was too much for this area. So I end up deleting it and I end up instead going with something that I think will work much better. So instead here, I go ahead and put in just an actual small bathroom stall that is themed entirely like a crypt. I feel like this allowed me to add a lot more detail to it that I wouldn't have had should I have used that larger building. I just felt like using the larger building was making me compromise in certain ways on the actual design. I didn't like that, so was much happier with the way this came out looking. And the main things I wanted in this area were a drink shop and a bathroom. So I was able to get the bathroom in this little crypt here, and I think it fits in the front yard because of the tombstones and such. It is sort of just a funeral parlor style view or feel to it. So I think that works. Go ahead and add this little decorative entrance to it. Then I copy it over. And I use the crypt entrance again, this time the one that's for a shop front. And I go ahead and put it in place. Originally I'd think about putting another piece of crypt in here, just to add to the detail level, and I decide against it. I was thinking about sort of having it go through the building and be on the back of the area there, but I felt like it's detailed enough the way it is. It's simple, it's straightforward, but I think it works for what it is. Then I just go about here and add in little details on the front lawn to fill out the theming of the lawn. some random and more chaotic tombstones and such. Um, as you noticed, I've moved the trees around a little bit so I could fit the crypts in. I looked at a tombstone there that had some writing on it, decided against it. Just doesn't fit for what I'm going with here. So instead I just add some more of the blank ones. Then I throw a few coffins around. Here I am working on the back of the house again, and just like I had done on the one side, I wanted to add a character onto the areas here. So I go ahead and I put the sort of evil bride into this window, which once again, just something that the people can see from the train. So that way, again, it just has that little bit of extra interest for them and makes them want to come over and get onto this ride. And that's sort of what I was wanting. So hopefully that comes across with it here. I get it lined up, and then on the other side I also put another character, just so no matter what side you're approaching the house from, you have this little bit of extra interest to it. Then I go about boarding up some areas. Because this is a haunted house after all, I want to make it look a little bit run down. So just using some wood pieces here, I go ahead and block out some of the windows. This is also about the time that I realized that some of the windows light up at night in a way I didn't intend for them to. And so I go ahead and turn off the screens that are in those windows so they don't light up in a negative way. It's all about just doing sort of haphazard wood here just to make it fit the best I can. Also board up a couple of the doors, just as I said, to make it look like something's gone terribly wrong here, and there's, they're trying to keep whatever it is either locked inside, or just that the manor is in disrepair, and these windows are boarded up because of it. I think this is about the time where I realize that the windows are doing this, because I go ahead and turn things to the dark mode here in a few moments. I do go ahead and add some lighting to this fence here, just so that way it gives some light into the area without taking away from the overall view that I have created. Now here's that interior wall piece that I had been talking about. I knew I did want to go ahead and use it once I had seen it, and I felt like this room was perfect for it because really that wallpaper is truly hideous, and so this breaks up that horrible wallpaper a little bit in a positive way. I do go ahead and run it around the entire room, which does mean I have to move some things off the wall, such as the fireplace and stuff, to make it work, but it does work rather nicely, so I'm fairly pleased with the overall outcome. Took a little bit of doing, but it was worth it. Same with the bookshelves on the other side. I end up having to move those off the wall, and then I sort of do a trick where I double them slightly in order to just make them look a bit thicker on the two ends, so that way it doesn't look like the bookshelf is actually off the wall. I decide that I need a little bit more stuff on the roof here, so I add in a couple more chimneys, changing the color of the smoke that comes out of them, just so it's more unique overall, and it's a little bit, gives a little bit of diversity to the look on the roof. I like the amount of red smoke that's coming out of those back two, so I figure the ones in the front, not strong enough. I need a bit more out of them. So I go ahead and replace them with the bigger smoke creators in them. So that way I'm getting a nice amount of red smoke in them. Then, as I had said, I rethought these torches. I thought, the skull and crossbone torches just are a better fit for this area. So I go ahead and put those in. Right now I've sort of got them in the same place as the torches, just so I make sure that they're lined up where I want them. And then I go ahead and delete the original torches. Set the trigger to these, and it works out perfectly fine. Go ahead and put some gargoyles here on the fence, just to add a little bit of extra detail. Originally I was going back and forth between the big gargoyle and the little ones. I felt like the big one was just a bit too much maybe, so I end up using these little ones that I think fit just better with the overall look. The big gargoyle works up here quite nicely. Thought about putting them also in the corners up here, as I really did want something in those corners, but it just did not work. And then I go ahead and add a sign in here, just another one of those sort of campy things here that you do see on a lot of ghost trains. I actually may come back in and change the coloring of it a little bit, because when you're riding it in the daytime, as you will see on the POV at the end here, it's a little bit bright. I wish that it was a little bit darker in nature, so I'll have to play around with that slightly. But overall, this pretty much completes the entire ride. I do go ahead and put a bat here hanging from the ceiling, just as one more visual piece of interest to the room. But overall, if you enjoyed what I've done here with the haunted house, please go ahead and click that like button. If you've not already, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so that you're aware when I produce new videos in the future. Thank you, and I hope to see you all again for the next episode of Planet Coaster and of Appleford Amusement Park.